Hi everyone, welcome to the Superhuman Switch, the mind, body, business empowering podcast of high achievers guaranteed to switch your superhuman levels on. I'm your host, Saf. Today I have Rami Alhamad. Welcome Rami to the pod.
Thank you.
Rami, you are an engineer and entrepreneur with passion for strategy, technology, and of course business. You have a cool startup, a wearable startup that basically focus on the sport performance that was recently sold to WHOOP in 2021. So today I'm really excited to discuss with you, of course, the whole spectrum of the sport performance, and at the same time discuss what are your future ventures in that field. So again, welcome to the pod.
All right, thanks.
Rami, again, when we met last week, first of all, thank you very much for visiting Dubai. It's always, we've reached out. Actually, I reached out to you on LinkedIn a while ago, and you dropped me a message recently that you're coming to Dubai, so I took this as an opportunity. But I was not aware that you are raised in Dubai, in Al Ain mainly, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
I spent the 90s here.
The 90s.
Yeah.
Cool. So first, let's cover the background because I'm really interested why you have took this journey when it comes to the sport performance, especially on the technology side, and especially that I've been like a user for WHOOP for almost 2 years. So I'm really interested to understand this human kind of technology connection. So please take us through the background, and we're gonna jump into it.
Absolutely. In terms of inspiration for jumping into the wearable space, the benefit of time is that you've got hindsight, right? You can kind of look back and retrace your journey through life. Growing up here at Al Ain in the 90s with my parents, I was fortunate enough to have really kind and loving parents that pretty much got me any toy that I wanted. So I was a bit spoiled in that regard.
Okay.
But I realized that I pretty much played with the toy for the first day and then immediately went about taking it apart, no matter what it is. So I ended up with this giant cupboard of just like broken toys. Taking out the RC car and seeing how the motor works and seeing the magnets inside of it and trying to figure out how it works. And, when you think about that and you realize that I ended up in engineering, it's not really a surprise. So I ended up going to school in Canada, studied mechatronics engineering, which basically really boils down to robotics, anything has to do with that kind of intersection of mechanical and electrical engineering. Did a master's afterwards in health tech. Initially, the path for me was academia, but then kind of decided it's just way too slow of a pace. I kind of like a little bit of adrenaline rush in my life in sports and fitness and, of course, in professional career. So naturally, I was drawn to launching a startup. So I started a company in 2013 called Push. It was a sports technology wearable startup. I was really trying to scratch my own itch, like they tell you. Whenever you're trying to come up with ideas, try to think about things that you are personally kind of passionate about.
Yeah.
And you just don't really have any easy access to. And for me, the problem at the time was that I was in this... let's kind of quickly pivot to like my sports life journey here for a second. So
Yes.
I grew up as early as I can remember playing sports, every kind of sport imaginable. Never particularly good in any single one of them to the point of taking it to the next level, but good enough and passionate always about competing, about participating in sports and being active.
Okay.
In 2012, 2011, I had this powerlifting phase where I was basically in the gym, Mark Ripito, starting strength, just like, pounding the weights, right? Squats, deadlifts, bench. You see me doing one of those three pretty much every single day.
Yeah.
And it was a fun phase. My denim couldn't fit and it sucked. Like finding the right size denim in 2012 for somebody doing that is terrible.
Sorry, there is a funny story here because it's been like almost 8 months I didn't wear like a suit and tie.
Yeah.
And I jumped into the powerlifting for the past like 7 months.
Yeah.
And I was focusing on the main lifts, mainly squat. And I was invited to a convention here and I tried to put the suits on like, okay, they are not fitting. So, and I'm trying to solve this one. So now you remind me with the denim, like, okay, there's something wrong here. Shall I change all my clothes? That was funny.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, go ahead.
It's crazy. Somebody should do that. Actually, that's a business idea right there. Like suits for powerlifters. Like
I've seen such concepts. It's more like a stretch fabric.
Yeah, exactly.
But the problem in this, when I looked into it, like, okay, it will look like tiny jeans or like a tiny pants. Yeah. I think it's not my style.
It's not my style either. Exactly. Yeah. So, anyways, I was kind of struggling through that. But the real problem for me was I'm in the weight room every day. I'm hitting the gym, and I'm trying to figure out what weight should I be lifting, right? How much weight should I be going up by? It's a classic challenge of like, do you push yourself hard enough, or you're not pushing yourself, and you end up in this like mental game land, right?
That's true.
And 9 times out of 10, that's how you get hurt, right? So I ended up getting hurt because I was just pushing way too hard. Went up, I especially when you're starting strength, right? Like you get used to those easy gains, right? Like you're just stacking like another 10 pounds every day. And then at some point you plateau. Well, I kind of missed that plateau by a bit.
Okay.
I ended up getting hurt while I was squatting. It just went down, couldn't really get back up properly. I could feel something was off, and I had to take a couple of months off. So I immediately started thinking, I put my engineering hat on and started thinking, well, like, it's kind of like a gym is kind of like a physics problem, really, when you think about it, right? We have these, I've spent years looking at physics problems, and what do we look at? We look at forces, right? How much force are you applying in a specific direction,
That's
right?
true.
How much force does it take? Speed.
With the gravity.
Gravity, exactly. You're always competing against gravity. It's physics, fundamentally. So when you start thinking about the gym from a physics environment perspective, you start realizing that like there has to be some sort of guideline or rules that could actually like drive the right kind of behavior, right? This shouldn't be a guessing game.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I realized. I'm like, you know what? There has to be something better here. So I started digging in. I kind of did your classic kind of like Google Scholar deep dive into the world of sports science. What are the best of the best doing, right? And I discovered this concept called velocity-based training, VBT.
Okay.
Basically, the concept is actually incredibly intuitive. It immediately clicked for me, which basically what it does is that you look not at the weight that you're able to lift, but at the speed at which you're able to lift the weight. So you completely stop guessing what weight you should be lifting. You just go in every day. And if you're able to measure the speed rep after rep, you're able to do two very important things. One, based on that speed, you're able to know when you're fatiguing in a set, right? So you start the first rep, you're hitting, let's say, 1 meter per second, right? And then second rep, 0.9, 0.8, right? It's very, like it's intuitively
Like a curve,
obvious.
kind of like
Exactly.
intensity and volume.
Yeah, like intuitively, when you're in the gym and you're lifting, that fifth set, right, is going to be slower, right? Like you know it.
Yeah.
And that fourth rep on the fifth set is definitely going to be slower than even the first, right? So you start looking at that curve, you look at the velocity loss, and there's all these tables since early 90s that have been established, mostly by Soviet Olympic teams in the 80s that kind of eventually made it to the West in the 90s. And they all kind of shown that there's actually this very predictable pattern. And you should really optimize your training around 20% velocity loss. So don't just like keep grinding. If as soon as an athlete goes in the first rep, hits a meters per second, by the time they hit 0.8, they should cut that set.
I see. This is where the equation of like training on the 70-80% of your maximum lift is the ideal to sustain the growth or the strength in the journey.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's...
Yeah. So that immediately I'm like, well, that could have saved me from getting hurt, right? Like I could have just used that
almost
method.
pushing the end, always pushing it. True.
The other cool thing about it too is you start thinking about how you do it's called auto-regulation.
Okay.
So instead of basically guessing what weight you should be going up day in, day out, week in, week out, especially if you're a professional athlete and you've got actual sports, like you're on the pitch, for example, practicing as a soccer athlete, or if you're playing baseball and you're out there, right? All that, like that's a variable load that the strength coach or the athlete doesn't have full control on, right? So one day you could have a really intense practice session, one day you could have a really light practice session. So the weight room environment should adapt to that training load. So the cool thing about VBT is that the coach can go in and be like, I want you to lift at the speed. I'm not prescribing to you what a weight should be here. I want you to be able to move the weight at the specific speed. So every single time you go in, like if you lift and you're not able to move this weight at the specific speed, just drop the weight. If you're crushing it and you're just like flying way over, going back to that 1 meters per second, let's say you go in, same weight, and you're hitting 1.2, well, you've got more gas in the tank, right? Let's just push a little bit harder. That's kind of where the name came from.
That's interesting. Always I have this question in mind. When you are recording all your lifts and you reach a point that maybe physiologically today you're not in a good, basically you didn't sleep well, all these kind of like other pillars involved in your life, that you reach the training weight and you are expecting to lift this number or to add the percentage, but you're not able because...
100%.
I like this angle because it has a different variable that I don't think anyone looked into it when it comes to how to adapt to the training capacity to make sure that you're either sustaining or you're growing in your strength and your athleticism. Yeah. But yeah, I'm really interested to know when you had this concept, because you work with more than 150 athletes and you work with even Olympic organization, which is impressive. What are the initial phase of testing? I'm really interested because I'm sure they have a complete kind of like coaches, nutrition, psychologists, strength, endurance, all of the kind of like full stack of like team.
Yeah.
How did you introduce this concept, and how did you have basically the buy-in of such a tool?
Yeah. It's a great question. Yeah. So kind of to quickly finish off what I did, when I started discovering these methods, I looked at what company is out there servicing, providing this metric. And I found a couple of companies. They're all fairly small, very focused on the top of the athletic pyramid, right? So they're charging, thousands of dollars per device. The devices are really bulky. They're not really designed with a user-friendly lens to them.
Okay.
And around 2012, 2013, I saw the rise of wearables like Fitbit and Nike Fuel Band and Jawbone and a whole bunch, right? And I knew that, okay, there's a time now where we can start thinking more about a software-first approach to developing the technology. So instead of a big, bulky device with a lot of mechanical components, why don't we just focus on more software-based, leverage the fact that people have got smartphones in their pocket and actually do something a little bit more intelligent, something a little bit lighter, something that they can travel with, something they can easily deploy. Practical, right?
Yeah.
So that's pretty much what I did. I just kind of decided I'm going to build this technology company, started recruiting and putting a team together. And day one for me, I think, again, benefit of hindsight, I think one thing that maybe was helpful for me is that because I wasn't a deep sports scientist, I was more of an engineer, I was humble enough to kind of go and try to reach out to as many professors, academics, strength coaches. I would take any meeting with anybody, anywhere, pretty much, just to learn as much as I can about how this should technology look like, what should it perform like. And having like a really solid grounding in engineering school, like I went to University of Waterloo. It's a fantastic school for this kind of stuff. They mandate co-ops. So like when you're studying, you have to study for 4 months and then you have to work for 4 months. And you do that like right out the gate.
Real life kind of practical
real life
curriculum.
Exactly. So you end up learning a lot about practical skill sets of building technology. So I basically started talking to coaches, learned about the problems with the current system, started focusing on building prototypes. And very early on, at the time, 3D printing was still new, but we wanted to use it. So we actually 3D printed our first prototypes.
Okay.
I built the first one myself, and then I recruited much smarter, better engineers to kind of help me. And I focused
But at
more
least
on
you went to
sales
the
and
trenches
business.
to understand how.
100%. You have to. And I had the good fortune of like knowing a little bit to be dangerous about all the different things that I need to do. So I basically, I jumped in, built the prototype, started kind of getting it into the hands of local coaches to start in Toronto.
Okay.
And then over time, once we were kind of quite ready, one very valuable piece of advice I got is to try to focus on the US market really early. So I kind of took the crazy leap of literally just hopping in my car. I still remember when I had like first batch of prototypes, I lined up meetings all across, I basically drove from Toronto to Chicago, down to like basically the Midwest, and drove all the way back to the East Coast, and then drove to New York, and then drove back to Toronto. This was probably like 4 or 5 days of driving in total.
Wow. Okay.
It's
called resilience.
Yeah, exactly. With a box filled with prototypes and like early units, and I just booked all the meetings that I can. And I had it was great. It was incredibly rewarding, but also had a great win out of it. So we ended up last minute being able to see the Detroit Lions, the NFL team.
Okay.
Met with a young strength coach at the time. Now he's like one of the top NFL coaches. He was with the LA Rams when they won the Super Bowl. His name is Ted Rath. So I spent some time. Basically, I went to him, showed him the early units. He was using the other tool, and I still remember the moment vividly. I walked out the gate after the demo. I got a call from him. He's like, "Hey, we like this. We want it." I'm like, "Okay."
That was quick.
Yeah. I was, all right. Well, I can get you like, how many units do you need? He's like, 20 units. Okay, great. And can I pay now? I'm like, okay, all right. Let me see how I can do this. So I actually I'm like, just give me 1 second. I'll call you right back. Went on Stripe. I figured out that I can put the credit card information in there, and I literally just booked like,
wow.
You do not want, if somebody wants to pay, you take it, right? You don't want to delay it. So I literally like took the credit card information, put it on my phone, and booked our first sale, pre-production with the Detroit Lions.
Sweet.
And that just kind of helped, catapult us. We just started seeing more and more teams on board, and grew from there, from 1 to about 150 professional sports organization by the time we exited.
That's really cool. And I'm sure that this kind of transaction, or at least you have an actual athlete, it open up like multiple basic to understand, to iterate, and how to improve in the technology.
Yeah.
And at the same time, at least you have good credentials from such a team where you can approach other teams, I assume.
Absolutely. Yeah, the one iron law of anybody doing anything in fitness and sports, in my opinion, is like, believe in the pyramid. Like the athletic pyramid is very real, and I've experienced it. I started the journey, and luckily enough, managed to close some top-notch teams. And once I got those NFL teams, NBA teams, professional Olympic organizations, going to college sports in the States, which is massive, became much more practical. Going to high schools eventually, that's really where we see most of our financial growth over time. It's more scalable, but we really started at the top and went down. And you kind of have to earn it. Like, it's not easy to sell into those teams because they're incredibly demanding.
Of course, there are high expectations. At the same time, I would say high maintenance. Yeah,
for sure.
I assume though.
Yeah, you gotta. I had to show up in Detroit at like 6 a.m. to do an install with the University of Michigan basketball team. It's like a world-class basketball team, produced a number of incredible NBA teams. So I had to leave Toronto at like 1 a.m. You make it work in the early days. You do whatever it takes to try to get in.
I love this because also I did a little bit of case study about the whole kind of solutions in the fitness and the recovery. Is that it's you have to pick up your battle. When you look into the fitness pyramid, you can start with the bottom of the pyramid, but these people are like high maintenance. I would say high maintenance, and their acceptance or consistency is very low.
It's fickle, is a term.
Yeah,
consumers.
That's true. Trendy. They try it 1 week, it didn't lead to anything. Then the more you go up, it become more sophisticated. But as you mentioned, it become more challenging if you have a cool concept to set the expectations right, to deliver as per their requirements. But usually I'm so fascinated how the middle of the pyramid, which is the active and the recreation athletes, are more interesting to venture in. It's something that at least you can understand their pain points. They don't have like an athlete, like a competition kind of like top athletes aspirations, but they are like a big size of the market, and especially now the health awareness and fitness is really increasing. But it's really challenging is that to start from the top and how it cascades down. But don't you think when you go down to the pyramid, it will compromise in the quality? Just when it hits scalability, the quality of the solutions becomes lower because
you definitely can't just copy paste whatever you do at the top. Like ultimately in NFL or any Olympic organization, you have a team of support staff that you're working with, right?
Okay.
You're rarely interfacing directly with the athletes, right? So when you start going to the more of the prosumer segment, you have to start thinking about a direct interface with the individual. And this individual is trying to manage their potentially kids, their busy lives, their corporate career, and they're trying to get their fitness in. So you can't just assume that, hey, I'm going to give you this very complicated system and you're going to just spend the hours to learn it. You have to kind of make sure that the ramp up curve is really tight and it's really dialed in for them to build.
What do you think about the wearable business? Because I wouldn't say thanks, but at least the big companies, they are venturing from Apple, from Google, of course, what are the solutions that they are giving is really practical as a user. But I'm really interested to discuss because I need to see how the user is now adopting these solutions. Before, I used to wear multiple devices from the Polar Stage, Garmin, WHOOP for 2 years. And the only thing I realized after a long time, because I used to enjoy the metrics and measure everything when it comes to the performance and recovery, but I started to notice that I'm disconnecting from my body awareness, and it started to bother me somehow, like, okay, I'm losing track here, although all the numbers in front of me, but I'm confused. What the hell I can do with this? Despite the fact that your solution is more about the movement, which is something cool, but I would really interested to hear your perspective about the technology of the wearables and where it's heading. So
that's it's spot on. Like, I think that observation is really good. One of my closest friends, he's a hardcore athlete, Ironman, did Kona multiple times and like ranked really high up. And one of the things that, we don't really run that often together. Maybe on his casual run we run together because he's usually like averaging, 3:30, 4 minutes a kilometer. I'm more in the 5 minutes a kilometer range. Running is not my main sport, but I still love it. But whenever we hang out and we talk, one of the things that I remember he said that stood out to me is no Garmin, no rules. So basically, he intentionally, just to make sure he establishes that mind-body connection, he intentionally does runs, longer runs or shorter runs, where he doesn't put on his Garmin.
Okay.
Sometimes even goes biking without Garmin. And the idea is just not to be so obsessed with metrics all the time, looking at your power score on that bike, looking at the speed that you're able to hit and the pace. Just enjoy it, right? Go for that run and enjoy it. And I really firmly believe in that. Like, I try to make sure that I like to track certain activities over time just to see how I'm progressing. But I really try to make sure that I do certain things that just are not trackable that easily, right? Like, hiking, like ultimately, like if you do a rough hike, like I don't think tracking necessarily is super valuable.
That's
so
true.
I just try to go in nature and disconnect for a bit,
Yeah.
right? But I totally agree, and I think this is kind of where like the wearable space gets a little bit complicated, because on the one hand, it's providing you this valuable feedback and metrics that can improve you. And as we gain more knowledge about the human body, you can only expect more metrics to be introduced.
That's
right?
true.
Like now, half of Silicon Valley has got a CGM on their on their back of their arm, right? And they're tracking their glucose levels now. Like, where does this eventually go? I think what I'm optimistic about, and this is definitely something I'm kind of thinking about for whatever I do next. I'm optimistic about how the trends on ChatGPT and GPT-3 and some of the more generative type machine learning, how it could potentially become like a much more interesting interface for wearable data.
Yeah.
Like imagine if you're just getting this very human sounding feedback right into your AirPods while you're doing an exercise, but you don't necessarily have to keep scanning your watch on that run to track your pace, right?
I see, yeah.
Like that's just a very simple example of it, right?
Humanize it and at the same time to make it more practical. I think this is where I see the gap from avid user, that I started to see that I have a lot of numbers, but I'm confused how to simplify it for me to do the right action. Because I think we covered this point before, that the application of things is more challenging than knowing the metrics. I think there is a nice angle what you're talking about, especially that now with the GPT chat is like becoming a big buzz, and how to people try to adopt these technologies and how it's like having an impact on other existing solutions. Because I see like a future, but again, the main point here is to make sure that also not to disconnect how we understand our body. Is you sleeping okay? It doesn't have to be relying on the metric, because sometimes I wake up and I'm in a very good condition where my device saying like, you didn't sleep well. It's like, okay, I'm not feeling well now.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's more like a psychological, and this is what I'm trying to disconnect from time to time. Of course, as you mentioned, you can use some metric to see where's your baseline, how you're improving, but at the same time, not to be highly dependent on these tools, because what the hell is like, I'm feeling okay. Why are you saying that I'm not okay? So
yeah, absolutely. This is more a story about my time at WHOOP, but one of the things that was intriguing to me is that at the professional levels, WHOOP is still deployed by a number of Olympic teams and so on, and those athletes are actually like they have a specific setup and an option in the platform where they can disable their readiness scores and strain scores, and even sleep scores. So like their app becomes really just like a very dumb, simple interface with almost no data. And all that data goes to the dashboard for the coach to see. Because come competition time, the last thing you want is an athlete waking up in the morning saying, oh, you didn't sleep very well. And
That's
now
cool.
you're compounding the effect, right, of that poor sleep. Because you're also impacting the psychological aspect of it. So
that's really cool.
Yeah.
And because I've been like a period of time that I was all over the place. I was not sleeping well, and like I knew that I'm not sleeping well. I don't need the device to tell me, and it was like consistent threat for a long time. I started like, okay, I'm not sleeping well, and it's adding more stress to me.
Exactly.
Becoming like a vicious cycle.
Absolutely.
But I was not aware from this feature, because people are still interested to see how I'm performing, how can I improve on it. But again, going back to the point of how you can aspire to a more advanced technology, because all the big players are not trying to compete in that field. And I'm reading recently research about how this technology is booming when it comes to the metrics, the readability, the devices, the hardware, software, and how now the AI is going to play a big role how to shift this forward. But I really aspire to make sure that these solutions becoming more as a practical, not only dashboard and numbers.
Exactly.
So yeah, I see potential there.
We need to get there.
Yeah, definitely it's going to be there. It's not the fast pace of technology is not scary. It's really cool.
Yeah.
How things are moving forward.
It's exciting times.
Yeah, no doubt. Your journey in this technology, I have no doubt that you had challenges and failures.
Yeah.
So take me through one of the failures, because your tech is a bit sophisticated, and as you mentioned, that the target group was more sophisticated and demanding in a positive way. But what's the main failure or challenge that you faced to make sure that your solution is out?
Yeah. Oh man, there's no short. It's a 8-year journey. Definitely no shortage of failures.
Yeah, it's
along
long.
the way.
I was
Yeah,
to
yeah,
mention the timeline.
yeah.
It's really cool.
When they tell you hardware startups are hard, yeah, that doesn't even like scratch the surface of it.
Seriously.
Just like the complexity, just quadruples or 10x's from software play, just because you're constantly having to think about supply chain and manufacturing, and you got to plan all these additional layers before you can really hit the market even. But it's honestly very rewarding. I'm still definitely. I think I'm sadistic enough that I might actually do another hardware startup. We'll see.
You have the know-how.
Yeah, but now again, I'm advising a bunch of startups, and the number one thing I tell any early stage startup, especially their concept phase, I spend probably like a few hours at least just challenging them on their need for hardware. So I'm like a hardware startup advisor that spends most of the time trying to talk you out of hardware. Because I firmly believe you want to have a very well thought out strategy and a true need for hardware. A lot of times I find early stage founders want to do hardware for the glitz of it maybe, or because they just feel like that's, it gives them a lot more control. But that control comes at a really significant cost. And early on, there's a good chance you might not need it. So
I see your point, which is valuable, because I know the value chain of creating a product is quite challenging.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna cover the competition, but at least the whole value chain, from the design, the concepts, the prototyping, the manufacturing, the distribution, and how to reach out and convince the users how you use it. I think it's all like red flags.
Yeah.
I can imagine red flags in all the
Absolutely.
stages. Where this is where the software came in. I wouldn't say that it's the ideal solution, but at least faster to develop, faster to test, to prove your hypothesis, and then we can iterate or pivot to another solution.
Absolutely.
But there, the hardware is more challenging. But at the same time, despite the fact that supply chain issues now post-COVID, that I think now from a product development, it became much easier from different resources globally, and how you can create the prototype and fast. And of course, the 3D made it much easier to come up with concept, test it, and see it worked.
Exactly.
I like the fact that someone who has like a unique startup convincing the founders not to do a product because like it's quite challenging.
Yeah. No, definitely. I'm very supportive of startups. I love seeing people take the leap into it. Just hardware, make sure that you really thought it through. But going back to my failures, just to make sure we cover them. I don't want to dodge that question. Well, let's see. On the product side, I think probably one of the biggest early failures was overbuilding. It's a classic kind of first-time entrepreneur challenge. Basically,
Feature freak.
Yeah, exactly. Overbuild, overspeccing. Oh, I want all the features. I think that probably the worst decision I made, I take full ownership over it, was insisting on launching on Android and iOS on day one. Very dumb mistake. Small. We had a small lean team of I think like roughly 6 engineers at the time, and I'm basically challenged the team to try to do it. Back in 2013, it's a little bit easier now. You can definitely do it much more practically. But back then, you had to have 2 different code bases. You had to code in 2 different languages. You had fully dedicated Android and iOS developers that couldn't really necessarily talk to each other that well.
Okay.
Very different stacks. Not to mention in our case, because we had this algorithm engine, we also had to like make sure that the core IP and the algorithms that are being developed
Compatible for both platforms.
and can run efficiently.
Yeah.
So I pushed for Android, and then to kind of like almost double down on my mistake, I insisted on coming up with a team solution that was tablet based, and I used these Android tablets, and came up with this very cool idea at the time of being able to like tap the band, our wearable, on the iPad and have it automatically register this band, and then automatically you'll be able to use it. So imagine you walk into a weight room, and the vision I had was you take a push band from the front desk, you tap it on an iPad, automatically it pairs, and then you're able to use it with that iPad. And then, just to, again, maybe triple down on the mistake, I wanted it so that you can go to any other station and have it automatically, just by tapping your profile pic, automatically know that you're wearing this band and connect to it so you can use it.
Yeah.
So the idea that if you're, as a coach, you're running a circuit-style training program with your athletes, that you could literally just walk through as soon as the athlete has their band on, they're basically registered everywhere. Great concept, right? Like from a user friendliness standpoint,
I see it practical.
The technology was not there yet. The tablets, NFC sucked. That didn't work very well. The Bluetooth pairing was Bluetooth Classic, not Bluetooth 5. It was terrible. It took forever to connect. The Android tablets were not that stable, and my team had to support it while supporting an iOS app. So very tough decision that I had to make after recognizing that this was futile and it's really stretching ourselves too thin. 6 months in, I basically pulled the plug on the entire Android project and had to just double down on iOS. That came at a cost from a PR standpoint because we had to kind of go back to folks that have bought our product with Android in mind and now basically pitching them on iOS. We tried our best to like subsidize iOS devices for them. So we even like pitched in some money to help them transition to an iPad. But it wasn't a pleasant period, learned it the hard way. So that was on the product side. In terms of the business model also, I think I made some mistakes there. In fairness, I take full ownership over it, but in fairness, I was also just like reacting to the environment. Like hindsight tells me that it was a mistake, but at the time it wasn't obvious. Every single wearable under the sun back in 2015 was sold as a hardware buy. So, you go to the store, you pick up a Fitbit, you walk away with it, and you're good to go. Apple did the same thing, still does that. But what I realized is I was selling to coaches, and I was selling, I had it where I underpriced it, and I kind of like priced it for scale when I didn't really think that like the timing wasn't right for the scaling it. Like one of the lessons I learned around pricing is that you really want to push the boundaries of what you're able to price with early
from a value
on.
point of view, not from a solution only.
Exactly. Yeah. Push for as high of a markup and premium as you can early on, and then you can always walk it back down if you want. So we kind of ended up going the other way, where I started off, I think we were retailing at $189. By the time we sold, we were selling at $500 plus per device with a subscription component baked into it. So you also had to pay a portion of that annually. Yeah. And we actually had more sales because I think the value of the product was very clear. Our customers really appreciated the value, and compared to our competition, we were still like much more of a value play than any of them, considering all the features that we offered. Yeah. So pricing is hard, as you know, but I think I probably could have used a little bit more time to think through it from a customer lens. Like, what am I solving for them? How are they using it, right? And then make sure that the business model actually reflects the use versus just following the pack of whatever anybody else was doing in the wearable space.
True. See, it's quite interesting, especially when it comes to the pricing, because it's more psychology, more than the landscape or the competition, what they're doing. Exactly. Yeah. Because if you look at it from the angle of the value that you can provide, obviously you had like a superior proposition. Yeah. But again, that depends how you are going to this kind of like fear of putting a kind of like an aggressive pricing, and it's scary because if you present it this way, people, they might accept. But the good thing about this, it filters a lot of like non-loyal users in the long run. Yeah, exactly. And as you mentioned, it's much easier to project or basically to drop the price because it will be perceived as a good value that you are dropping the prices. Yeah. Where if you increase the prices, it will become the villain. Yeah. So it's even in that angle that, okay, how can I price this one? It's always a challenge. Yeah. It's good for trial and error. But yeah, it's this is part of the game. I think you are fully aware of this one. Yeah. But I'm really interested now to see, based on this experience with like big players, big teams, what does it mean the human performance to you, especially that you are in the field, understanding the implication of any sport or the injuries that it can take you a long time to recover from. What's Rami perspective about the human performance, especially that you work on such a tool?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's definitely evolved over time and over many dinners and drinks and time, talking to coaches and experts who've dedicated their entire lives to this. Something that's really stands out to me, I have to say, after spending 8 years working with coaches at all levels, is just how selfless that career is, that career choice. You basically, they're fundamentally givers, I think, coaches. The great ones, at least, right? I'm sure there's some that are more commercially minded, but the great ones are fundamentally givers, because you basically wake up and you're spending your entire time thinking about how do you enhance the performance of this other individual, right? And you're really dedicating your time towards kind of improving their world. And a lot of them, the great ones, are just very much focused on that, being selfless, being able to work with them. So I've had the good fortune of like getting to be really close friends with many of them over the years. And what you start appreciating, especially coming from an engineering lens, where I know I was trying to add a number to everything, is just how complex high elite performance is. Like, when you watch a game, especially the Olympics, right? especially the Olympics, because it's a 4-year cycle with this like activity that often like ends up in the minutes, right, or sometimes even in the seconds, right? And you have you look at it, you watch it on TV, and you kind of just go on your day. But when you start spending time in that space, you start appreciating, like, holy shit, these guys and these athletes, these men and women, have spent 4 years, day in, day out, obsessing about every single minutia, every single detail to get to that level. And it just kind of changes your perspective about the level of complexity of it.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that you appreciate is, I think the way I would kind of phrase it is that there is a certain element of dedication that comes with human performance at that high level, right? It's really the sum of many, many parts. You start appreciating that sleep, taking care of that engine, the body, is really it's much more rigorous and much more complicated than just simply like lifting and training hard, right? That old school mentality, I think, that was in pro sports probably in the 80s and 90s have really shifted over the last 20 years to a much more holistic approach, right? Now, professional athletes have like sports psychologists, right? Where they're spending a lot of time just working on mental preparation, right? Visualization tools. They're thinking a lot about sleep. Sleep is now an incredibly important topic, right? Professional NBA teams, for example, they're playing games East Coast to West Coast, and there's a whole art and science now around how do you get them to recover on the plane ride? How do you make sure that when they're coming in, you're adjusting for the time zone in an effective way? I'm sure all the World Cup teams right now actually are spent, you've probably have at least one person on staff in every single one team thinking about how do we get these players to play at 7 and 11 p.m. Local time and like still perform.
Everything adds up.
Everything adds up.
Yeah.
All these like little bits. Nutrition is much more complicated of a topic than I ever imagined. And what's cool to see over the last 10 years especially is that I would say probably 10 years ago, except for the Olympic level, it was very much, even at the pro soccer and pro NFL, it was still a one size fits all within the team. So generally speaking, most teams kind of just provided the same nutrition plan to all their athletes, high quality, but like fundamentally the same nutrition plan, same training programs for the most part, maybe varied slightly by position. But now we're getting to this point where it's starting to be hyper individualized, where every single, and this is thanks where technology is coming into play, it's able to like help drive and hone in, like how do we make sure the nutrition is dialed for the specific athlete based on their gut microbiome, make sure that they're just metabolism, right? Make sure that certain things that they respond well to versus others, like we really understand that now at a much deeper level, and we're able to like do that in a scalable, efficient, practical way day in, day out. Sleep, same thing, health, psychology, all that good stuff. So it's a very well-rounded perspective. And now what I'm spending a lot of time thinking about is with Push, it was very much focused on strength conditioning, performance benchmarking in the weight room. Now I'm taking a step back and I'm trying to think like holistically about how do we take those elements and pieces from all these different aspects that I've seen in pro sports and potentially, bring it more to the prosumer market in a practical, efficient way. Going back to what we were saying earlier.
True.
Yeah.
See, it's fascinating because I went through the case study of the Sky team, the British cycling team, and when they onboarded a coach that he took this seriously, I think 7 years ago, more than 7 years, I don't remember what, that they took into every element for every athlete and the small details like the type of pillow, the type of toothbrush, how the nutrition plays a big role, what time they eat, how they consume, it's fascinating when the number of details that led them to take multiple awards and of course the winning a lot of competitions. And I had the chance also to invite one of the Paralympics British. He's a gold medalist and he broke 2 world records. And he explained to me of topic the podcast, but he told me about the details they go through as an athlete. It's fascinating. This is where people started to become more aware, the common people, I'd say, that how can I take this and scale it to make it more practical in my daily life? Which is, of course, I don't have a coach, I don't have a psychologist, I don't have nutritionists, but at least to carry on with these kind of a basic stuff that I can apply it on my daily life. It's becoming more, and people become more aware, despite the fact that the obesity and the health issues becoming like exploding. But I see this is where the potential that with your value and with your knowledge with these athletes, how you can deliver this in a more scalable approach.
Exactly.
But yeah, it's and the other point now, I'm interested to know that how this tool and the tool that helped you? Because you've experienced multiple sports, but were you like interested to experience it personally and how you improve on that?
Absolutely, yeah. You know, I've done all kinds of crazy things over the past few years, just in the interest of trying things out. You know, cryotherapy, cold plunges, like you name it. I've kind of played around with whatever I could kind of come across, recovery tools. Yeah, you know, I think it's, you know, I'm a tech geek and I like performance, so naturally I'm constantly thinking about what's coming around the corner right now. I think probably the most exciting thing that I've tried over the last few years was CGM. So I put on CGM for a couple of weeks, used Super Sapiens.
CGM is
continuous glucose monitors.
Okay.
Those little.
That's why when you mentioned Super Sapiens, it's
exactly.
like it measures the insulins and the sugar.
I think
sugar
there's
level.
one here called Ultrahuman.
Ultrahuman.
It's interesting because of regulatory environments. Basically, it's almost like regulatory moats around certain businesses. Like Super Sapiens hasn't launched in the US as far as I'm aware. They're only available in UK and Europe. Then you've got Levels and a few others that are playing in the North American market. NutriSense is another one. And Ultrahuman seems to be much more here. But long story short, they're all using those sensors that are actually mostly meant for diabetics, type 1 diabetics.
That's
right?
true.
Type 1, type 2. But what they're effectively doing is they're taking that technology and seeing how can it actually improve someone's diet and nutrition. That's an everyday person, right? That's just looking to understand how their body reacts to specific things. And there's some really interesting learnings that came out of that for me. For example, Super Sapiens really focused on fueling strategies for ultra long rides. I'm not doing 200, 300K rides, but I usually do 100 to 150 fairly comfortably. And going on those long rides, it's really cool to kind of see how your glucose levels start to dip over time, and how you drink that Gatorade exactly when you need to, just to make sure that you stay steady. So that was kind of cool. And then also seeing just like how certain foods were spiking my glucose levels. Like, I have a bit of a sweet tooth, which is kind of, everybody's got their weaknesses. So I got the love for sweets. So it's really interesting to kind of see specific sweets spiking it more than others. In my case, also the impact of things like cinnamon and actually like reducing it.
Okay.
And then finally, what I learned, and this is where I kind of took it from. I quite frankly didn't feel like I need to wear it all the time, but in those 2 weeks, one thing that was like an incredibly efficient hack that I learned and I've now internalized is after dinner, go for a walk. It could be a 10-minute walk. I do it in Canada when it's like minus 30 out. I still go for that 10-minute walk.
Yeah.
It does wonders to your glucose levels. Like you spike after that big meal, however big it is. You go for a 10-minute walk and immediately you regularize it.
Like flushes out.
Yeah, instead of this like really slow degrading slope, right, while you're sitting on a couch after dinner, you just see this really nice spike back down right after the walk, and you're much better. You get higher quality sleep out of it, especially if you should try to avoid eating before going to bed anyways, like usually 2-hour window.
Yeah.
But you get much better sleep regardless out of it. Longevity-wise, it's really, really good, just health-wise, to not have like elevated glucose levels over time. And that was probably one of the most interesting things.
That's really cool technology. I'm a fan of this obstacle runner athlete. He's now number 1. His name is Ryan. I think he's Canadian. In the Spartan race, and he tested this. I was like checking during the race that he was like checking the monitor, and based on the monitor, he was consuming something like gel, energy, and hydrate. And then I realized that he's using the CGM tool, and he was really tracking based on the performance. After like a long distance, he can consume something to keep pushing. But yeah, I think it's an not emerging technology. But I think they are tied with the big companies as a license from Abbott, and I think because it's like an affiliated technology. But I see a big window how to improve. Going to this, how Rami is basically now knowing all these technologies. How your daily lifestyle is. Is it something that you are, I would say, focusing on it in multiple, because of course these practices as a lifestyle, they are really important, and everything adds up. This is just to summarize that small things, the quality of hydration, the type of food, when we do a certain exercise, post-exercise, before going to bed. I played around. Similar to you, I have my freezer at home. I do sometimes sauna before I go to bed. Now I wake I walk half an hour in the morning with the sun, in the afternoon. thanks to Huberman's, like
Yeah.
the type of knowledge we are receiving is really cool. I'm interested to know, Rami, now.
Yeah.
How's your typical day going with this kind of like a lot of technology and engineering background is going?
Yeah, no, it's great. Honestly, it's a constant balancing act for me. I would say like I kind of go through this phase of like over prescribing and over, specifying everything that I'm doing, and then I kind of just go back to like, all right, let's reset, let's simplify, let's make sure that we focus on hacks, and I kind of go through this ebb and flow phase over time. Right now, I feel like I'm in a really good spot. I've basically got all these like little mini life hacks that I've picked up mostly from Huberman and from others in like high performance world, seeing what they're sharing and talking about.
Yeah.
Definitely, focus on sleep. That's kind of paramount. Spending a year with WHOOP definitely kind of ingrains that in you. Sleep. Focusing on just getting that good quality sleep, right?
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily about
Hygiene.
just exactly.
Yeah.
Screen time before bed, right? Eating, especially before bed, like just making sure that you clean that up. Getting sunlight as soon as you wake up. That's made a dramatic impact on just my sleep quality.
Yeah.
Right now, I've been like playing around a lot with like supplements. I'm trying to see. I've definitely expanded my repertoire. Like you talked to me 2 years ago, and it was like omega-3 and vitamin D in the winter in Canada because it's just a must. Now I'm starting to like look a little bit more at potentially like just more supplements, adding different things like turmeric, curcumin into my daily rotations, looking at adding zinc, selenium, starting to add a couple more. And I think part of it, to be honest, is just like as I'm getting a little bit older now in my late 30s, my perception of fitness and health is not the same that it was 10 years ago.
It's maturing.
Exactly. It's maturing. Exactly.
Becoming more wise.
Yeah. You crush a steak and go lift and run and maybe go out drinking the day after.
Yeah.
Like, okay, maybe that's not the smartest idea now. Like it's about taking care of this machine, right?
That's true.
So you start, so for me, I love variety. I'm not a single sport person, clearly. So I like to lift a couple of times a week at least. I work out every day. Lift a couple of times a week at least. Make sure that I'm just maintaining strength, muscle mass. Do cardio just to make sure I train the heart. I'm not as prescribed. Like Huberman has this like really awesome workout protocol.
Yeah.
And I would like to potentially like incorporate some elements of it, but I'm not that prescribed. Mostly because I actually love playing sports. I like playing with people. I find it's a great way to socialize. I think, to be honest, I would love to see more of that in the next 10 years, just like more recreation. Because I think you're actually hitting two whammies there. Like you're getting mental health benefits out of it, right? When you play soccer, even if it might be stressful because you got in a little tiny fight or something, it's still fundamentally you're socializing with other humans. It's great for your mental health, and you're getting an exercise out of it. So I would love to see more of that as a go-to fitness modality instead of, I don't know, spin classes where you're sitting there spinning and you've just got somebody screaming at you.
True. Yeah.
I like doing variety. So I like to play squash, tennis, run, bike, lift. But I always try to hold firm to like at least a couple of 2 to 3 days a week being like more lifting focused. And then the rest I try to vary it between different cardio activities just to train the heart. What else? Honestly, pretty simple. Like I am now, I feel like I've gotten my sleep dial to a point where I'm not necessarily like checking my stats every single day. I'm much more focused on just how I feel.
Okay.
I'm trying to cut out caffeine. Coming back to the Middle East, especially having a lot of cool meetings over the last 10
Sorry
weeks
for
here.
the double espresso.
Yeah, exactly. I now I feel like my caffeine intake just shot up 1,000%. But it's, but I love it. So it's all good. It's just a lot more espressos in me.
Yeah, coffee is always something passionate for me. But again, when I used to work back in Nespresso, I used to drink at least 8 double espresso per day because your environment plays a huge role. You are in the business of coffee.
Yeah.
But at the same time, now I started to like cut it off midday.
Yeah.
Because I'm sleeping early, just to maintain. Because I started to enjoy waking up super early, which is really cool.
Yeah.
But it's I love coffee by all the experience that comes with it. It's like really passionate about it. Yeah. But I'm being realistic, going to be wise to the moment you grow up. But I love your perspective, how you look into it from a long term, because this is. I think we can carry on with the conversation in the future about now the aspect of longevity, because the generation became more aware about the health awareness and how we can take this in the long run, especially if you are basically aiming to grow up healthy, to make sure that you don't have any type of chronic diseases. We cannot avoid this, unfortunately, but at least you will maintain a kind of a decent, kind of enjoyable lifestyle if you want to do certain activity. And I think it's a well-rounded approach to these things. What's next for Rami? I know that you've like venturing a lot of things. You have an amazing background. What's next, at least from an aspiration point of view?
Yeah, it's a great question. I am. I'll give you the kind of the lowdown of what I've been up to. So I wrapped up my time with WHOOP in August, and since then I've been doing mostly product advisory work with early stage founders, just to kind of stay relevant, stay kind of connected to the early stage, get to see what other people are building across a number of different spaces, and I'm really enjoying it. I love talking and working with founders, and they seem to be enjoying it as well. I think having that founder empathy, where I've kind of been in the trenches and I'm seeing what they're building, and we're able to have like really good, honest conversations. That's been really great. Now I'm starting to shift gears towards thinking about what I want to build next, and I have a couple of different ideas that I'm kind of toying with, mostly in the topics of health technology, and they're kind of really honing in on two different areas right now. One is more nutrition and supplementation, and one is more aging, actually. So longevity, and there's a broad category there. Like I take it all the way to like aging in place, for example, right? Thinking about as people get older, how can we make sure that they're, if you're getting to your mid-70s, how can we make sure that you can stay at home for longer? How can you functional? And that's partly motivated, I think, by like just seeing my parents as they were aging and thinking about how can I build solutions to make their lives more practical.
Yeah.
So there's that aspect of mission. And then the longevity aspect of it, I think, touches everyone. So I'm kind of thinking about that as well as a topic. I do think that the topic of longevity, to me, like I'm not a Brian Johnson. Like I aspire to cut 5 years, out of my inner age. Like I just think that kind of like pursuit to live forever without a specific kind of reflection or philosophy is kind of vacuous. Like it's not a chase that I want to be on just for the sake of being on it. So I think I'm trying to take a bit of a different take on it, and I'm trying to think about ways that. He's taken it to an extreme. I'm sure you've heard about Brian Johnson. He's kind of been blowing up recently about this stuff. I'm trying to think more about how can we create more like practical approaches to it that actually fit everybody. And it's more about the quality than necessarily the longevity of it, right? What I would love to be able to do, at least on a personal level, is in my late 60s, 70s, still be able to go out for a run, still be able to bike, still be able to like enjoy time with like younger people, play soccer maybe, right? Yeah. Those are the things. That's kind of what I aspire to, and I would love to kind of figure out ways that I can contribute to that at a society-wide level.
Sweet.
Part of the reason I'm in the region too is I'm originally from here, as you know, and one of the things that I've been hearing nothing but great things about the Dubai and the wider Arab world's startup ecosystem. So I'm really kind of toying with the idea of potentially coming back, seeing if I can build something here instead of in North America. And I've been meeting a lot of great founders and a lot of great, like the ecosystem here, I think is really buzzing. It's been very exciting. So, my wife has joined me on this trip now. I'm trying to get her acquainted. She's Lebanese Canadian, but spent most of her life in Canada. Okay. So I'm trying to get her acquainted with the GCC and the UAE especially. I'm hoping the Oman camping trip the next couple of days will help.
You'll enjoy it. Enjoy it.
But we'll see. I think the plan is come back in January. I've booked this 10-day Vipassana meditation retreat. So I'm going to be disconnected from the world for 10 days at a meditation retreat. After those 10 days, I think I'm going to hopefully come out with a little bit more resolution about what I want to do next. But I'm definitely very excited about what I've been seeing here.
Sweet, man. Yeah. I wish you all the best. I love the mission. I love the mindset. Yeah. And it's really a pleasure to have you here, Rami. Yeah. I really thank you for that. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And thank you for the online engagement, by the way. Follow us, subscribe, rate, and share. We are on Apple, Google, and Spotify, and YouTube. So get your switch on. Rami, thank you very much, my friend.
Thanks a lot, sir.
Pleasure.